Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Lightning Warp Omni Assassin. Ever since Joseph released his meme Lightning Warper in 2020, I was trying to make it viable in a modern PoE landscape. 3.17 brought some changes to the game which reignited my faith into the build, and I'm extremely happy with what I ended up with. Lightning Warp is a movement skill with a cast time and a duration, and we're reducing its duration to 0 while scaling as much cast speed as we can get to result in what you see on the screen right now. To further enhance its single target damage, we took some steps. Number 1, we're using the newly reworked Orb of Storms, which gives us a huge single target damage boost because of our rapidly hitting lightning skill. We're also using Omniscience to scale elemental penetration and fix our resistances at the same time. As for clear speed, the one thing we needed was more coverage, which we fixed with Inpulsa's explosions and a shock prolif implicit from gloves. Inpulsa's explosions also scale with Omniscience, making it a lot more potent than you're used to from recent patches. The biggest reason I went for the build this league though was that boss rushing is one of the best ways to make currency right now, and this is the perfect build for it. I can't believe how fun this build ended up being. It's one of the fastest builds I've ever played, and for me personally, it's a lot more fun than something like Flicker Strike, because you can have full control over where you want to go, and you don't need an enemy nearby to go fast. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. Alright, so now before we go into some of the juicy stuff like skill setups or items, I want to quickly address what this build is actually for and who this build is for. So as you might have guessed already from the footage, this build is very, very fast. Now what does that mean? Usually when a skill is extremely fast, there is downsides to it, right? Like for example, it just won't have the biggest single target damage, or in order to do any damage at all, you have to be very squishy. Now I didn't really go for the squishy route. We actually leveled to 99 on this, and the reason is I just like at least semi-tanky characters, right? This character doesn't have to be super tanky because we're not doing some of the harder content in the game with it, but it has to be able to withstand something. So we go for 100% spell suppress, we go for armor evasion. We don't go crazy, right? We don't have to tank level 30 Simulacrum Cosis or something. But what I wanted to do with this build is also address some of the single target problems, and Orb of Storms comes in very clutch there. But what I want to point out is if you want just a straight up all-rounder build that is okay at everything, right? This will probably not be for it. As you can see here, you want to leverage the skill's strengths, and the strength of the skill is clearly being fast. So if this skill was crazy at single target as well, everybody would be playing it, right? Because if you want a boss, you probably should take a skill that doesn't like zoom around like this. You can't really leverage its speed if you're bossing, right? We're also using Impulsas, which is basically only good for like mapping, simulacrum, stuff like that. So if you're looking for a bosser, look elsewhere. If you're looking for an extremely fun mapper and boss rusher, this is it. Just two important things to note about Lightning Warp and how fast it can go, right? Number 1, so it is a lightning AoE movement, travel, whatever you want it to be, right? Skill, but also important is it has a duration and a cast time. So what that means is the cast only finishes after the cast time and the duration is over. So what can we do to make that faster? Well, number 1, we're going to scale as much cast speed as possible, but getting the cast time to 0 is impossible, right? But what we can do is we can reduce the duration at least to 0. And that's actually not that hard. You don't need less duration support or anything. All you need is like a few levels to your Lightning Warp. For example, here I have an Empower in a +1 level socketed gems, and it is 56% reduced duration. Couple that with the 30% from the helmet, and we're already looking at 56 plus 30, right? And then we're missing 14 extra, and we get that from the passive tree right here. Now, don't stress if you don't have the levels yet. Maybe you're running a level 3 Empower. Maybe you don't have a +1 Impulsa. It's not that big of a deal, actually. Even if we're, for example, looking at like 52% reduced duration, you would still be at like 0.0 something duration, and you wouldn't even, like, you wouldn't really notice. Also, I want to point out that the wiki actually says that there is a minimum duration that you cannot go under. Now, if that is true, if the minimum duration actually exists, it should be 0.1 duration. It makes sense, but I have not felt it yet. Because if that was true, this shouldn't really do much for us. But I do feel the difference of using it and not using it. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. Maybe it's just me being biased. But yeah, if you feel like you don't need this anoint, you can also just leave it out. Another important thing to know about Lightning Warp is it actually hits twice. If you look here in the gem description, when the teleport occurs, lightning damage is dealt to the area around both where the player was and where they are teleported to. So you might have seen in the intro the Conquerors that I did, and you were like surprised, wait, Lightning Warp does single target damage. That is because if you stand on top of your enemy and you just do this, it actually hits twice because it has the same destination as the starting point was. Now, this doesn't really mean that against bosses you just have to stand there. You can still do this, right? It has some duration, but you don't want to go like this, right? Because otherwise it could be that you're actually not hitting the enemy twice. Now, another cool thing about Lightning Warp is that while you're warping, you're actually considered to be stationary, which you can abuse with some things. So what do I mean by that, right? So usually you would move, right? But with Lightning Warp, you don't move, you'd warp, right? And while you're warping, it does not consider you as moving. So what this means is that number one, movement speed is not as important as in other builds, right? So for example, my boots, these are the boots from my last build. They're extremely expensive, right? They have Tailwind, Elusive, everything you want in a build. But the thing is, you don't really need that because movement speed does not enhance your lightning warping. The only thing that movement speed does, and why it's still nice to have if you have the currency, right, is while you're looting, right? While you're looting, you're not really going to exactly like port to everything that you loot. For example, the loot's going to be there and then you click over there and the movement speed's going to be nice, or like around corners or something. But overall, movement speed is definitely not as important as in most other builds. And number two, you can use effects that say you get something while stationary. For example, Arctic Armour is usually not the best aura because you're not always stationary, right? You're moving around and then enemies hit you and you don't get anything. But in this case, you're always stationary because you're always lightning warping. So you always get the 13% less physical and the 12% less fire damage taken, which is an absolutely huge defensive boon. Also, against bosses, you can use Soul of Tukuhama, which gives you up to 9% additional physical damage reduction, and some regen while stationary. Next up, let's talk about our single target skill, which is Orb of Storms. So all you have to know about Orb of Storms is that you pop it down whenever there's a tanky boss, and it will enhance your single target damage drastically. So this got reworked this league, and how it works now is basically you pop it down like usual, right? You do this, and then whenever you're casting a lightning skill in this radius, it is going to ping an enemy around it, and I think it also splits toward nearby enemies, but you're usually only using it against single target anyways. But whenever you're activating Lightning Warp, this will hit an enemy. So one more thing, Orb of Storms also hits without you casting anything, which isn't that relevant, but I just want to point it out. Strikes every 2.5 seconds, it says here, but it also says in the gem description that modifiers to cast speed will increase this tick rate. So the 2.5 seconds do get scaled by all your cast speed. Now don't be fooled though, Orb of Storms looks like it does almost no damage in PoB, but the thing is you have to understand that this damage here occurs whenever you're casting a Lightning Warp, right? Lightning Warp's average hit is pretty small, but obviously you get a lot more full DPS because you have a lot of cast rate, right? So this basically, I would say, gives you around about 50 to 70% more damage, which also isn't really accounted for in the PoB. And I want to point this out again, right? Lightning Warp can actually get to quite decent single target damage with investment. The only thing is I don't really use it for that. I don't even pop down Orb of Storms against enemies, against bosses, because with the strats that I'm running right now, everything's just dying anyways. I just want to point this out. If you want to bridge the gap into something else than just boss rushing or out can go, Orb of Storms is going to be huge. Now, let's also quickly talk about Omniscience or Omniscience or however you want to pronounce it. So this amulet is very, very interesting. A lot of you already know how it works, but I still want to go over it. So basically, this converts all your attributes that you have into Omniscience. You can check your Omniscience, whatever, right here in the MISC tab. And what it does is basically, while you have this on, all your attributes requirement get converted to Omniscience, which makes everything a lot easier if you have the gear to support it. You also get 1% of all elemental resistances per 10, and then you also get 1% LE pen per 10. So if we're doing the math, this gives us 141 elemental penetration and 141 all elemental resistances. Now, I don't think I have to sing the praises of this. We've already seen it in basically every elemental build this league. There's like Ashes of the Stars or Crystallized Omniscience, which are both insane. Something I want to point out, though, is also its interaction with Inpulsas. Now, explosions are actually quite hard to scale in terms of damage. A lot of people are only doing explosions because they don't have, like, they don't get corpse exploded on or anything, right? Or it's more like cosmetic, whatever they want. But we're actually trying to scale its damage because we only want to cast once with our Lightning Warp and then move on and move on. And in order to have a good, like, coverage, we want to use Inpulsas. And scaling Inpulsas, not that easy, right? It cannot crit. So in a crit build like this with Assassin, right, you might think, well, what the hell? You don't really get much damage. We're kind of circumventing that with scaling quite a bit of just straight up lightning damage, which scales it. Area damage also scales it, right? But the biggest thing here is Omniscience also scales it, which basically just times 4s your damage on the Inpulsa. It's absolutely insane and makes it a lot more viable as a clear tool other than just like a cosmetic thing. Another reason why Inpulsa's explosions are so strong this league is the new Eldritch Implicits. So one of the problems with Inpulsa always was that its damage cannot really chain. So what that means is an enemy dies to the explosion, and then that enemy cannot explode because it says here that Inpulsas cannot shock, which is a problem, right? So wherever you hit, only the first like layer of enemies actually explodes, and then it's kind of like stopping. Well, there is a mod that's called Shocks You Inflict Spreads to Enemies within a radius, right? Basically, shock prolif. Now, what we used to do and what a lot of, for example, Herald of Thunder auto bombers did is they had to use Storm's Gift. The spread is so good, the shock prolif is so good that you actually sacrifice your glove slot just to get that one stat, which is not necessary anymore, which is huge. You can actually cap your spell suppress, or at least get your spell suppress up. You can get stats for your omniscience. You can get life. You can get like whatever you want to. Just not having to use Storm's Gift is a huge indirect buff to Inpulsas. Now, in order to show you how this actually plays out, I'm gonna quickly, I opened a Alhazmin map so we can actually see a Conqueror fight and we can see the map itself, right? So what happens here is we have a few buttons to press other than Lightning Warp, right? Our normal mapping will just be Lightning Warping around, and Inpulsa will clear everything. And then against single targets, we have a few buttons, right? Number one, Orb of Storms, I already explained this. This is a huge single target bonus, so you just have to kind of Lightning Warp in this radius, and then the Orb of Storms is gonna zap onto the enemy. Number two is going to be Assassin's Mark, which is basically just your curse or your mark for the enemy. It's gonna increase crit, whatnot. And then there's also the Zealotry setup. Now, this Zealotry here is linked with Divine Blessing, and Divine Blessing basically gives you sort of a free aura, right? If you put it on life tap. So what you can do is, for example, I don't have enough reservation to get Zealotry. It's like 30% more damage though, which is very, very handy, right? So if I press Q, the Zealotry, my life will go down, and now this is reserved for a certain amount of time. I think it's like 18-ish seconds or something, because I also have increased duration. And whenever you press this, you just couple it with a life flask, and it's basically whatever, right? So these are the things that you do against single targets, but let's quickly go through the map here. So this is an atoll. We can go through the whole map. Usually we just rush to the boss, right? But we just go here. I have a very strict loot filter right now, so there's not much looting going on. We can go down here. So as you can see, all you do is basically Lightning Warp around. And yeah, the single target ad is pretty solid, as you can see at the essence over there. Also nice against essences is if they get duplicated, right, from the Atlas passive tree. The cool thing is that once one of them dies, the other one will die as well, because it will explode onto the other one with the Inpulsas, right? So against single targets, you can put down stuff. I'm going to put down stuff. You don't really need to against like a boss like this if you have good investment, right? We didn't even put the Orb of Storms rule up, right? It just dies immediately. But what you do need it against is like big enemies, right? For example, chunky enemies like a Hunter or Alhazmin, right? So we put down an Orb of Storms. We put down our Zealotry, and then we just do this. I didn't apply the mark. I kind of forgot. Let's see if we can Zerg him down quick. Yeah, it just happened, right? So that's what you can see. You have a few buttons against single targets, which is how usually a lot of builds work, right? But the cool thing about this build is you don't have a movement skill and then your main skill. They're both in one. As for defenses, this build isn't really trying to be that tanky because it's made for more lower tier content. At least my version is, right? The more investment you get, you can obviously make anything tanky that you want. We're going for kind of like a armor evasion hybrid style. So what we're doing right here is if we have our flasks up, we're at like 22k armor and 26k evasion with the molten shell. That's like a 5k molten shell. And then we also have the spell suppression layer, right? So we have 100% spell suppression. Now do note that basically everything I have there has to have spell suppression because our chest cannot have it, right? So it's a lot harder to actually cap it. But overall, this will just be something that you will get with investment. As for Pantheons, we're choosing the Soul of Lunaris. Now, we do not need Cannot Be Frozen from Soul of the Branking because we're using Arctic Armour, which makes you immune to freeze, right? So it's either Soul of Lunaris or Soul of Arakali. Both are really quite good. I would say if you have minus chaos resistance, I have a little bit from a large cluster, but if you have minus chaos resistance, probably go for Soul of Arakali. It's very, very nice against pesky dots, right? But overall, I like the Soul of Lunaris a little bit more. And as for small Pantheon, these are completely interchangeable to whatever you're currently doing, right? I'm doing Soul of Aberrath because I'm doing the red influence, right? So I'm doing Searing Exarch. If you're doing Searing Exarch, you should always pick this, otherwise you're going to get destroyed, right? Otherwise, like I said, Soul of Tukahama is very, very good because you're always stationary. If you're having problem against poisons, go for Soul of Shakari. All right, so as for Ascendancy, we're going for Assassin. Now, Assassin has a lot of great functionality for us. Number one, the no-brainer points are Unstable Infusion. It gives us power charges. It gives us +1 power charge, and it gets us here to Deadly Infusion. We're not really power charge stacking because power charge rings are like, I don't know, over 100 exalts, right? If you get them, good for you. You will do way more damage, but Deadly Infusion is still extremely strong. And we have Opportunistic, which is a complete no-brainer. It's just super good in terms of damage. Now, the last part here is a little bit interesting because most people go for Mistwalker on most builds, right? But we actually went for Ambush and Assassinate. So you might be thinking, oh, the reason you don't go for Mistwalker is just that you have it on boots, right? That's not really true. Even if I did not have Elusive on boots, I would still not go for Mistwalker. It is a very, very strong node. You're immune to crits, basically, right? But the thing about Ambush and Assassinate is it just fits so well into the build. 100% more critical strike chance against enemies that are on full life basically means that we jump into a pack, we want to one-shot it, right? So it just makes so much sense. So you do not have to get to 100% critical strike chance. You theoretically only have to get to like 60 or 50 even, right? But we still want to get a little bit higher for single target damage. And for single target damage, we cap our crit anyways because we have Assassin's Mark. But against packs, we don't want to put on Assassin's Mark all the time. So this is just huge. It also gives you 15% more damage with hits and ailments against enemies that are on low life. Basically a more damage multiplier whenever the enemy is under 50% HP. And then critical strikes have Calling Strike as well. So there's just a lot of more multipliers in there as well. As for items, starting with Omniscience. So I already talked about this in the mechanics section, but basically this just fixes your resistances. It fixes your penetration. It's just a powerhouse overall. I think everybody who's been playing this league actively will already know about it. As for the Anoint, I already talked about this as well, but you want Window of Opportunity because it gives you reduced skill effect duration right here. If I put it on, that's 15%. Then we have our Impulsas. Now, if you don't want to go for any fancy corruptions, right, it can take quite a bit because you need like 1,500 Val Orbs and 1,500 Orb of Fusings to 6-link it, right? But if you want to take the investment, which is going to be around about 20x or something, right? You can do +1 gems, you can do +2 to duration, and you can do +2 to AoE, right? Those are all corruptions, and Lightning Warp has the duration tag, the AoE tag, so those are basically as good as +1. Then we have our helmet. So the most important thing about the helmet is the enchant, and that is reduced lightning warp duration. Now, either you buy this from somebody with the enchant and then you have to craft it yourself, or you already have a pre-made helmet and then you give this to a lab runner on TFT, for example, pay him whatever he wants, right? And then you get that enchant once he's done. But that one is an absolute necessity. Without that, this build won't really function. Now, if you have a 20% roll, only do 20% if you're on a super budget. You will feel the difference, but I will say with 20%, you're at least able to get into the build. Other than that, you can see in the implicit, I have 10% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills, which you can basically make with the new Eldritch currency. And I have 10% mana reservation efficiency of skills on the item itself, which you can do with the Deafening Essence of Loathing. If you want to have an easier time crafting, also do it like me and get like a fractured mod already that cannot be changed. Now, this is a huge source of mana reservation efficiency. If you cannot get these mods for some reason, you will have to adjust your gear and your auras accordingly. You'll probably have to cut your Defiance banner. Do note though that we're only using level 3 Enlightens. If you had level 4 Enlightens, then this wouldn't really be necessary. But then again, if you have access to level 4 enlightens, which as of this recording are like 23 exalts, right? You probably would be able to make this helm anyways. As for gloves, the number one important thing is that you have the implicit with shocks you inflict spread to other enemies within a radius of whatever, right? That depends on what kind of level you have. I think the highest is 17 and it starts at like 12, right? So the way you make this is with Exarch implicits. So if we go here, you just have to basically spam these, right? Spam these if you want to have like T1. That's the weakest, right? That's 12. Or you go higher if you want more, but that one is a must-have if you run Inpulsa. We also get Leech here. Now you can get Leech in other ways, but I just felt like it's really, really easy to do. For that, you just spam the other currency, the Eater of Worlds, right? So then you have Leech covered, you have the Shock Prolif covered, and then for the items themselves, the +2 is nice for Orb of Storms, but it doesn't really make that much of a difference. It's also more for the AoE that's also on there, right? Which is very nice. But other than that, I just have a Life Craft, and I have Spell Suppression right here, and I have 2 attribute suffixes to scale Omniscience. For our rings, GG would be +1 power charge rings, but because they're over 100 exalts, I didn't really feel like it was that good to include them here, right? So what I did is I went a little bit more out of my way to get creative, right? One of them has percentage strength and spell damage per power charge. Spell damage per power charge isn't that good. Don't go hunting for that because it actually, spell damage doesn't scale our Inpulsa. Lightning damage is what we want, right? But it's still a little bit of extra damage. The percentage strength, percentage dex, percentage int is all extremely strong. I tried to get, I basically made these by spamming Deafening Essences of Zeal. So these give 15 to 16% cast speed, and I just spammed them until I got a good combination of attributes. On this one, I got really, really lucky. On this one, I think I got T4 and T1, so this one wasn't as lucky, but I just stuck with it. This one has Maximum Life and Arcane Surge. Now, you might think, well, I can get Arcane Surge elsewhere, but not really, right? All our mana is reserved, and we're basically paying life for everything, or for our main skill, we're paying nothing, right? So it's very, very hard to get an Arcane Surge otherwise. So this is just straight up 10% more damage. For weapons, we're using 2 Void Batteries. Now, I got one fancy one with a 20% AoE implicit. Doesn't really make that much of a difference. 40% spell damage is obviously also really, really strong. Void Batteries are not really the best you can do. If you get a +2 wand with lightning damage, with a good veil, right? With crit to spells or crit multi, a lot of cast speed. These are definitely replaceable. You can get another 40-50% more damage with 2 wands, but they will cost you quite a bit to make. So I think like Void Batteries are just overall the best standard option. Something to note with Void Battery, though, is that it needs a ton of intelligence, which then gets converted to Omni. So you might not be able to put them on from the get-go. You need to actually scale your attributes accordingly, because the 245, so for example, right, if you have a perfect Omniscience roll, that means that you have to get 245 times 4. You have to get 980 Omni to actually equip these. So that's why it's important to definitely focus a ton of your stats right here. Also go for this wheel right away, Utmost Intellect, with the 5% increased attributes right here. If you still can't equip it after doing all of that, either wait until you get more levels and you fill out more of those nodes, or you'll simply have to replace them for now for like a +2 wand with a little bit of spell crit and a little bit of cast speed. Now, number 1 belt for this build, surprise, surprise, Mageblood, right? Number 2 belt, maybe Headhunter. I'm actually not that sure because we're not actually killing that many rare mobs in our boss rushing strat or whatever Alcan Go you want to do. But if you want to, and if you have a Headhunter, obviously it's going to be better than most things. But let's talk realistic terms. So an easy way to go is with a string of servitude with percentage, whatever attribute you want for your Omniscience, right? And then if you get lucky, you can, for example, get a double one with cast speed as well. Percentage life is also nice if you want to get a little bit more tanky. Now, another way to go about this would be to get either increased strength, increased dexterity, or increased intelligence implicit synthesis belts, right? So what you would do is you would buy one of these, and then you would simply craft on with essences that give you like attributes, right? So something you also want to look for if you want to make a decent belt, at least, is you want to go for item level 82 minimum here, because that will mean that you're actually able to roll all the T1 attributes, or at least in the belt's case, T1 strength, right? So what you would do is you would buy one of those, and then you would slam any of the essences you want. Now, belts can already roll strength, so the way you would make them is with either the dexterity essence or with the intelligence essence, and you would roll until you get a high strength roll. Then maybe if you have life, craft on something else, or you craft on life. As for flasks, if you have a Mageblood, I'm sure you'll know what to do, so I won't go over that. But basically, we're running a life flask, which can be nice, especially since we're going to press Divine Blessing. It's very, very nice to press Divine Blessing. You're going to pay like 2k life, and you have it fill up immediately again. We also want Bleed and Corrupted Blood immunity. Then we have a Quicksilver Flask. Now, you might think, why do I even run a Quicksilver Flask? You don't need any move speed, really, but it's still pretty quality of life for looting, right? But if you're doing harder content, you can definitely replace this. We're using a Chemist's Flask with cast speed suffix, right? So just a pure damage flask. We have a Chemist's Jade, right? It doesn't really matter whether you get evasion here or armor here, right? It comes out to the same, but basically you want a Jade and a Granite, and you want to have one armor suffix and one evasion suffix. As for enchants, we're using used when charges reach full, which basically just make it so we're always going to be activating them anyways. We don't really have to press any buttons. As for gem setups, our main link consists of our Lightning Warp setup. This is our 6th link. We have it with Empower. Empower is very nice. It's not only just damage. It also gives you a little bit of reduced duration because this scales per level, right? If you can't afford a 4, just go for a 3. Divergent Power Charge on Critical Strike. Divergent is pretty much unnecessary. You just go for the normal one. It's like an extra, I don't know, 16% increased damage, right? Awakened Increased Area of Effect. This is just to get more clear speed. You can definitely replace this with a concentrated effect. Just to be clear, all the clips you saw in the intro were without gem swapping, so you can probably get another 25% more damage just from gem swapping if you wish to do so. Increased critical damage because we're kind of starving a little bit of crit damage, and there's also not that many better options. And also Awakened added lightning damage. Now, to get the +1 level of supported lightning skills, this has to be level 5. So for example, if you already have a +1 Impulsas, this only has to be level 4. So definitely try to get it a little bit more high level. It will give you a lot of damage. Our secondary damage setup will be Orb of Storms, and we have this one in our gloves because our gloves have +2 to level of socketed AoE gems. You can get the same mod with Ashling on the helmet, and if you don't have enough currency to craft Ashling, this can also be crafted on the crafting bench. It is basically really, really strong for Orb of Storms, gives you extra single target damage if you care about that, right? So we have Orb of Storms. Then we have Life Tap because we're reserving all our mana. I'll show you in a second. And so this basically doesn't cost us anything. Then we have Power Charge on Critical Strike. Once again, like I said, it doesn't really matter if you have Divergent. And then we have Awakened Ally Focus because it gives us our Orb of Storms +1. And it doesn't need to shock because our Lightning Warp already does. Then we have our Divine Blessing set up. So this is basically our free aura that we can Life Tap. We're going to lose like 2k life that we flask back up immediately, and we basically have this for a duration, right? We put on increased duration to have this for a little longer. And then we have 2 more skills that we're just randomly using as 1 links, and we both have it supported to Life Tap to once again circumvent the mana cost. With Assassin's Mark here, Anomalous gives you some extra damage, so it's really, really nice. You basically only press this against bosses, and then you have Molten Shell, which is going to be on your left click, so it's going to be always up. As for our aura setup, the 3 most important auras are Grace, Determination, and Wrath. Now, we'll say this up front. If you at any point have problem with reserving anything, do cut the Arctic Armour and Defiance banner before you cut any of these. Some stuff has to do with levels. Some stuff has to do with not having the mana reservation yet from Helmet or wherever, right? You don't even need these. These are only like to make the character a little bit tankier. I wouldn't really been able to farm to 99 without those, right? But depending on your Enlightened level, that can definitely change up your mana reservation. So priority are Grace, Determination, Wrath. Wrath gives us a ton of damage. Determination, Grace fixes our defenses. And then we have Defiance banner, which is also very, very nice for defenses. And Arctic Armour at the end. I would say the most expendable one is Arctic Armour, then Defiance banner. Try to not touch any of these. Also, if you have money for level 4 Enlightens, you'll be able to not have, you will not need the mana reservation from the helmet, or at least you probably will only need the implicit. Next up, let's talk about the passive tree. So we're an assassin, we already talked about that. Basically what we're trying to get is crit, we're trying to get cast speed, we're trying to get life, a little bit of spell suppression right here. Definitely take this wheel. Now be sure that your helmet, your gloves, and your boots are evasion based, at least a little bit, right? They don't have to be fully evasion based, but only then you can actually get the 10% chance to suppress spell damage. Now, if you don't care about defenses as much, you can also go for the critical strike chance increased by suppressed spell damage, which will make your crit a little bit more consistent. Other than that, if you have, for example, +1 power charge rings and you're just juicing out of your minds, you'll probably not need these nodes at all, right? So definitely revisit that. We're going down to the power charge here, and we're also going down to Blood Drinker, which gives us a lot of sustain. And then we have our 2 cluster jewel setups. So what these cluster jewels are doing is they're giving us a ton of cast speed and increased lightning damage. Lightning damage, it's important that this is a lightning damage 12 passive jewel, because spell damage, for example, does not scale our Inpulsa explosions. So it's kind of like, it's the same for our main skill, but then it also has the upside of scaling our explosions, right? So the most important mods on here, and the ones that are a must-have, are 35% increased effect and 3% attack and cast speed. So I want to repeat this: important, 35% and 3%, not 2%, not 1%, not 25% increased effect. Exactly 3% attack and cast speed and 35% increased effect. The other 2 mods are negligible. I will talk about how to craft these later in the video, but basically what you have to know is these are just super good, right? They give us cast speed, they give us lightning damage. Most of the cast speed wheels are kind of out of the way. You would have to path 2 points to get mantle rapidity. You would have to path another 4 points to get crackling speed. So these are just kind of lifesavers. As for medium clusters, we're going for Towering Threat and Vast Power. Vast Power is the most important notable here. It gives us a huge AoE boost. These 2 Vast Powers together give us 50% increased AoE, also a little bit of area damage, which also scales the Inpulsa. Then we have Towering Threat, which just gives us more max life, makes it so we are a little bit more flexible in the tree. Then we're going further left on the tree. Definitely take this as soon as you can. Percentage increased attributes, mastery, and then just go full nuts on this. It will help you a lot in terms of attribute requirements, right? And then we're using a Militant Faith. So the mods on it are not as important as the keystone that you actually get. So as you can see here, carved to glorify, blah, blah, blah. High Templar Dominarius. Dominus. If you see Dominus here, you can see you get Inner Conviction. This keystone basically, usually it is Doomsday, right? And when we put this in, this gets transformed to Inner Conviction. And Inner Conviction gives you 3% more spell damage per power charge, which is huge for us. And gain power charges instead of frenzy charges. So the downside is you cannot get any frenzy charges, which we don't do anyways, right? And then also the Militant Faith has some roles, like a little bit of all res per 10 devotion, a little bit of increased effect of non-cursed auras per devotion. Devotion is basically just what these small nodes get converted to. Now, something important to note is also that Militant Faith can give you transformed notables. Now, just be sure to check that the power charge doesn't get transformed, because that would be catastrophic, right? And make sure, I guess, crew preparation doesn't get transformed, because this is a very nice cluster as well. Then we have the power charge wheel here. Now, do note you do not need the cannot be shocked while maximum power charges, because you're already shock immune because of Impulsas, right? So don't go for that. You can go for the increased damage per power endurance frenzy charge. You're only really getting power charges, so it's like okay. Especially if if you don't have 2 clusters, right? But one of these points is usually just going to be better. There's the second cluster, and we go down. It's very important that you fill out this cluster right here. Mana reservation efficiency, and then also get the mana reservation efficiency mastery. All right, so now let's talk about reducing the cost of the build. We're going to talk about all of these things, but the number one thing that's very, very volatile, because there's not that many, are the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels. What they do in this build is reduce our mana cost to 0, right? Which is awesome. We don't have to worry about mana. But if you cannot get these jewels, well, what do? Now, let's go through it in 3 easy steps. So basically, number 1, get an inspiration support. Divergent inspiration would be optimal, but they're quite expensive right now. So we're going to try out both with and without. So basically that means, I'll just recolored the chest real quickly just for the showcase. We're going to have Divergent Inspiration in here. I'm going to show you Inspiration as well. It's basically not really sacrificing all that much, because it gives you damage anyways, because we're an elemental skill. Number 2 is make room for free passives. You need Eldritch Battery, Zealot's Oath, and a Vitality Reservation Mastery. So if we go to our passive tree here, we're just going to respec 3 points. I'm just going to take these 3 real quick because I think they're the most expendable. You can also replace some damage if you feel like being more tanky. And now we have 3 points to take. Number 1, the Vitality Mana Reservation Efficiency. I will say that you will have to cut Arctic Armour for this to work, to get the Vitality in, but it could be that you actually don't need this point, so just play around with it and without. You can also play around with Vitality levels, but I think to have the most consistency, you'll need something like at least level 18 to level 20. Now, then what we take is we take Zealot's Oath because we want Energy Shield to regen, and why that is, we want Energy Shield to regen instead of life. And why that is because we're going to fix our mana with Eldritch Battery. So basically what this keystone does is spend Energy Shield before mana for skills mana costs. So as you can see here, the Energy Shield went over the mana. If I refund this back, it's back here again, right? It gives you a little bit less recharge rate, but it also protects mana instead of life, which doesn't really matter for this build. So now that we have Energy Shield to actually pay our Lightning Warp with, you can see here that's good and all, but our our Energy Shield is going down quite quickly. Well, that's where the Vitality comes in. So the reason Vitality is so strong in this case here, I'm just going to quickly... oh yeah, I already have the Vitality in, right? So we just have to reserve it here. You can see when you hover over it, you get 193 life regeneration. And the reason that's so good for this case is we don't really have much Energy Shield, right? We don't need much. We have 250. So if you had percentage regen, that would completely suck, right? But since this is flat regen, see what happens once I put on Vitality and I just spam around with my Lightning Warp, right? Our Energy Shield never really goes down because we're regenerating almost 200 ES per second and we only have 250. So we're almost regenning all our Energy Shield per second. So as you can see here, get a level 15 to 20 Vitality and cut Arctic Armour. We're basically already done at this point. But if you want to do it without Divergent Inspiration, now I think if I remember correctly when testing this, it was a little bit less good. No, it's still really, really good actually. Yeah, it still works perfectly fine, okay? Never mind. But I just wrote these down anyways in case you want some more tools to deal with mana cost for whatever reason. So number 1, you can actually get a Militant Faith with reduced mana cost per devotion, right? This gives you another, like, I think 7% reduced mana cost, which is nothing to scoff at, right? Just make sure that it's also Dominus, so you get the Keystone, and then you get a second one, like area damage per devotion, or as I had here, one of those, right? Just a second mod. Make sure that, unlike mine here, the Power Charge isn't like occupied by some other keys, by some other node, right? I just bought this one quick, but basically this is how you can get another minus 7% mana cost. And then at the end, if you want to go crazy, you can also craft a flask with reduced mana cost of skills. You would probably replace either armor or evasion, maybe cast speed if you really wanna. I don't see how this is necessary. I showed you everything. There's no like weird thing going on here, but just in case you need another alternative. Now, at the end of the day, what do you get for this? You might be thinking, well, we just sacrificed passive points. We sacrificed Arctic Armor, right? What the hell are we even doing here? That's a lot of things to pay for getting the mana fixed. But the thing is, you have to remember, now the Forbidden Flash and Forbidden Flame are gone, and you can get 2 more jewels, which means more crit multi, more life, more whatever you want. And also none of the life tabs in the setups are needed anymore, because all the mana you're going to pay on Energy Shield. You don't need any life tab setups anymore. Now, when talking about how else to actually shave off some costs from the build, what you have to understand is the build pays for defenses and single target. It does not pay for the clear speed. Clear speed is guaranteed with this build. You're going to be as fast as I'm going to be. You might miss a little bit of cast speed because you're not going to be able to make the clusters. But overall, this build will always explode. It will always feel good, right? So that's a good thing to start with. What you will have to pay for is spell suppression. So something that's going to be hard to maneuver through is getting actually spell suppression capped, right? I have 15% from my Watcher's Eye. I have 22% here. 22% here, right? You're probably not going to be completely spell suppression capped, and that is okay. If you think about a mapping scenario, most of the time you don't die to one big hit. You die to a lot of small spells, right? So it's not like a bosser where you have to have 100% or you're going to get one shot. If you have 80, 90%, that is still plenty fine. And if you want to save even more, you can say I don't want spell suppression at all. It will save you a ton of currency. Obviously, the implicit does not have to be 16 radius. If you have it on 12 radius, that's also completely fine. Other than that, yeah, just like cut some of the defenses. If you cannot afford the reservation efficiency, that will mean that you will have to play around with your auras, obviously. I would say as long as you can fit Grace, Wrath, and Enlightenment and Determination into the build, you're going to be fine. Now, you can go with whatever you want on your Omniscience. Obviously, the implicits are quite expensive. The percentage strength, int, whatever effect, right? But the most important thing, if you go for a budget alternative that has no corruptions, right, is get a high attribute requirement can be satisfied, right? So this goes from 15 to 25. And the thing is, you want to have that as high as possible because Void batteries need so much Omniscience that you will have to have at least 1,000 or something unless you have a high roll here. Now, you can also shave off some cost by replacing your Empower 4 with an Empower 3. I think Empower 3s are like 30C as of this recording. You will lose like 10% of your damage in return, so definitely get that fixed as soon as you can. The belt is also an interesting slot. Obviously, number one for belt would be Mageblood, Headhunter, then something like this, right? And if we go lower down the pecking order, what you can do is you can buy a synthesis belt with either percentage strength, percentage intelligence, or percentage dexterity, and you just craft with it, right? And you get more attributes on with essences. Or what you can do is at the super budget, super low budget is Cyclopean Coil, right? Just make sure that you have a good attribute roll right here. For example, this one here for 70C has 18% already with the quality of the attribute modifiers. However, if you can, I would definitely go for a crafted one with percentage int, strength, dexterity. I already talked about this in the item section. Now, next up, I wouldn't replace these. I will talk all about how to craft these in the next section. But if you want to replace these for some reason, because they can get expensive, you just go for normal cluster jewels, like normal elemental damage, your Sadist, your Prismatic Heart, whatever you want, just make them count, right? Because you still want the extra jewel sockets and the power you get from large clusters. But next up, let's talk about how we can actually make these cluster jewels the most efficient way. So this is what we want to have in the end. We want to have 35% increased effect and 3% increased attack and cast speed with lightning skills on our magic base. And as for base, you want 12 passives, lightning damage, and you also need it to be at least item level 84. And the way to get these two mods is simply just spam the hell out of alterations, right? It will take you quite a few. It will take over 1,000 most of the time. So definitely do that. You can also use augmentations, right? So for example, what you want to roll for, usually you won't hit both on your alteration. So you will, for example, hit like 35% effect. Let's just say you hit this with this, you can then augment, right? And something that a lot of people don't do is it is actually worth to annul here, right? Because annuls are very inexpensive this league. I think they're at like 2C right now. So what you want to do is when you don't hit what you want, you definitely want to annul here because you have a chance to get another chance at your aug, right? And you just continue and continue and continue. Boom. Okay, you got another annul. So now you have another chance and you just go and you go and you go. Now, average cost to get there is usually round about 3-ish exalts to get the magic base. So once you're done with alt spamming, annulling, auging, right? And you have this here, the next step you have to do is imprint. Now, this step will be more expensive if you want more mods. At this point, you could say, okay, I have a cool thing. I'm just going to regal and see what happens, right? So you can do this if you want to, and then you're maybe going to get something viable and you stop. But if you want to go further, right, this is already you already got the most important things. But if you want to go further, you will need these beasts here, right? And they cost like 0.7 exalts a pop, Chrysic Chimerals. And the way it looks like is basically you go to your menagerie and you will put in your magic cluster jewel right here. And what's going to happen is you go here, you go imprint, and then you have imprint a magic item. Now, basically what that does is it's like a safe state for your cluster jewel. Then you can regal, as we talked about here, right? Then you can regal normally, and you can actually undo it if it's not a mod that you want, right? And then you can imprint again, and you regal again, right? Until you get something that's good, like attributes or life, or whatever you want. Now, let's say you regaled into something that you actually want. Like, let's say any of these, right? Let's say T1 Dexterity. You're basically finished, but what you can do as well is you can actually get an augment life. Now, these are very hard to buy from TFT. You can also just Leo Slam if you want to, right? They cost like 40 to 50 chaos. But if you want to make this a perfect jewel, you'll have to aug life. And basically what that does is if we go to harvest crafting here, we can augment, and then you get an augment life right here. And the only thing that you can hit in the prefix is straight up life per small passive node. And so you have a 1 in 3 to hit T1, a 1 in 3 to hit T2 or T3, right? So in this case, we hit the worst one, which is T3, which is what happened to me, right? These are extremely expensive though. These are like 15x each. But yeah, I got destroyed on this one and on this one. So this is only if you want to give it like the finishing touch, get a little bit of extra life, but you can definitely do without this. But overall, I absolutely love this build. I love everything about it. This is one of the most fun builds I've ever played. Just understand what it is for, right? Like having a movement skill as your main damage dealer has downsides, right? Because obviously it is not like it is not meant to be a damage dealer. It is meant to be a movement skill, but if you enhance it enough, you can actually have a very, very good mapper, an extremely good boss rusher, but it's not going to be like a Simu 30 farmer. So just get your expectations right. If you need an all-rounder, this will not be for you. If you want something that is highly specific, but extremely strong at what it does, right? Like I said, boss rushing, Al can go. You can also do invitations like you saw in the intro, although that will need a little bit more investment. If you're in for that, if you're in for a lot of fun, if you're in for something that is like a more controllable flicker strike, this will be your build. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, I will be continuing playing this build. I will make a guide about the boss rushing strat real soon. We're going to see how much currency we're making. It looks pretty damn crazy so far. I'll tell you more about it soon. As for this build, I can't see myself respecing anytime soon. I'm having way too much fun. And I hope you do as well if you try out the build. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.